Today we're here with Dr Steph Ainsworth, Senior Lecturer in Primary Education at Manchester Met. We'll be talking to Steph about her background, research interests and practical tips to help teachers build resilience. Can you tell us about your background, please, where you studied and what brought you to this point in your career?
Yes, so I used to want to be an astronaut, which I gave up on when I realised I couldn't even parallel park a car. But I did do a master's in astrophysics at what used to be UMIST, which isn't there anymore in Manchester. And I really enjoyed that. It was really interesting. I spent some time at Jodrell Bank Observatory as well. But then I decided that I became interested in education. I really wanted to move into something where I was working more with people, because I spent a lot of time at Jodrell Bank just staring at a computer screen. And although the topic was really fascinating, I kind of realised I wanted to be with people. So I did my PGCE at Manchester Met when it used to be over at Didsbury. And then went into primary schools for 7 years, teaching young children, which I really enjoyed. But then I kind of missed being in education myself, and I missed being able to learn and read things. I was kind of a bit jealous of the children in my classes who were learning all the time. So I did a graduate diploma in psychology at University of Bolton part-time. And then I ended up applying for a master's and a PhD in psychology at University of Manchester. And that's where I started thinking about child language development and doing my research into that for my PhD. And then I applied for this post that I'm doing at the moment, because I was keen to sort of join up the two areas of research, which I love, and also teaching, which I love. So I now feel very lucky to be engaging in lots of research, but also working with student teachers and preparing them for their role as teachers, which is something I feel very passionate about.
So what initially led you on the path to becoming a teacher? What was that motivation to go along that path?
So I really fancied teaching because I'd always loved being a student myself. So I loved school from day one. I've got really happy memories of being in primary school and secondary, and then I loved being a student in higher education. So it's a kind of arena that I've always been really comfortable in, and I wanted to give something back to that and show other children how exciting knowledge can be and learning can be. And I've also, I really enjoy working with people. So I was really keen, having been studying for quite a while, to get back into doing something a bit more practical and working with people. And the reason I chose primary education is because you get to do a bit of everything. So it's really nice that you get to teach across about 10 different subjects, which is really exciting because you don't have to just pick your favourite.
Please, can you tell us about your research interests?
So one of the things I'm looking at the moment is teacher resilience and the kind of broader area of teacher wellbeing. So I'm doing lots of work on how can we support teachers in schools, and also how can we support our student teachers who are learning to be teachers at the moment. So that's got a bit of an emotional side to it. And I've also started to be interested in emotions more generally in learning. So how do emotions support the learning process in school? And I'm interested in this idea of epistemic emotions, which is basically emotions that we have in relation to knowledge itself. And I think that's a bit of an understudied area in schools. We tend to think a lot about what we call achievement emotions, and those are emotions that children have when they experience a reward or they get frustrated, but they're not really about the subject matter itself. So that's something that I'm really interested in at the moment. And I'm also interested in language development. So my PhD work looked at how do children develop their phonological knowledge. So phonological knowledge is children's knowledge of the sounds in words. So we were really interested in finding out how are children storing all these words that they know in the brain. So do they store them in terms of individual sounds, or like a more fuzzy kind of whole word representation of those sounds?
You've done a lot of research about teacher resilience and a lot of other topics to do with teaching and in the teaching field. What's the motivation behind that?
Yeah, so it was one of the things I was really keen to research teacher wellbeing when I came to my job as a lecturer, because it's something that's very close to my heart. Because I've been a teacher for a good few years, I know how rewarding it is as a job. It's a fantastic profession, but it's also really, really challenging. And I felt really passionate about, what could I do to help teachers through some of those difficult times using a kind of research informed approach. And I was just really interested in it as well, because I've always enjoyed studying psychology. So I wanted to kind of bring education and psychology together to explore that kind of real life practical problem.
How would you define teacher resilience, and how does it differ from resilience in other environments?
So resilience is quite a complex construct. When you ask people who haven't particularly necessarily been reading the literature, they tend to say it's about bouncing back. So it's this idea of you're facing some kind of adversity, some kind of challenge, and you're able to spring back from it. And that's not a bad definition, because it gives you a bit of a sense of what we mean by it. But in the research literature, we see that it's a lot more complex than that. One of the problems with the bounce back idea is that it's very individualist. So it's putting the emphasis on the individual person, almost suggesting that it's their responsibility to bounce back, regardless of what's being thrown at them. So that's quite problematic when you think about teachers, because it's, really, rather than saying, how can we make teachers be kind of made of lead, and we can throw things at them and they'll just keep bouncing back, maybe we should stop throwing so many things at them. So the approach that we use in our research is called the social ecological approach. And basically what that means is, rather than seeing the resilience as a purely individual thing that you should get better at on your own, it's we consider people to be part of a broad web of different things going on, so a broad ecology. And it's this idea that if you want to make somebody, more resilient, in inverted commas, actually you need to make the whole system more resilient. So it's about, how can we make schools more resilient? How can we have support systems in place? How can we make sure that the situation's not so challenging in the first place? In terms of how it's teacher resilience differs, there's a lot of crossover actually between teacher resilience and other areas. So that social ecological idea that I've just talked about comes from developmental psychology. So it's an idea that has come from exploring why some children better at coping with adversity than others. And again, when we're looking at children, there's been this movement away from just thinking about the individual. It's more about, if we're trying to promote children's life chances, trying to promote various aspects like well-being in children, we can't just focus in on that individual person. We need to think about their environment, families, social structures, society, policy, everything. So teacher resilience is, in a way, is just one specific case of a much broader phenomenon.
Do you think that like the concept of teacher resilience, do you think it's more of a known concept now, so it's more understood, or is it something that's developed over time that teachers need to be more resilient now than they have in the past?
That's a really interesting question. I think so yes, I think resilience is a term that's relatively new. It's a few decades old in the developmental literature, but it's only really started to be thrown around a lot in schools over the last couple of decades. That doesn't mean that there haven't been issues for teachers prior to that word being used. I think teaching's always been a challenging job because it's a very emotional job. I do think that the reason resilience is becoming such a buzzword in schools, that there's a few reasons for that. I think it is partly because of the retention crisis that we've had. So there is evidence to suggest that things have become harder over the last couple of decades for teachers. But just as examples, people are concerned about the current policy context. So, the effect that having inspection frameworks that are quite rigid and problematic in some ways can cause a lot of teacher stress, and the high stakes testing system can be a big factor as well, large class sizes and so on. But there's also much broader kind of social issues as well underpinning it. And I think the other way in which resilience is sort of found a new home in schools is through this idea of growth mindset, which has become very popular amongst teachers and schools. So when we're thinking about children in our classes, teachers are often using the word resilience as well, talking about children becoming more resilient learners. So they're kind of being used in quite different ways. So teachers are very familiar with the word, but I think sometimes it's used in quite troubling ways. I think we need to just be careful about using it in ways that are actually empowering for teachers and empowering for learners as well, in terms of children.
So what are some of the mechanisms that teachers can use to become more resilient?
So it's quite useful to think about individual mechanisms or individual factors, if you like, in comparison to contextual factors. And the key thing is that you need to work on both, ideally, if you're going to maximize your chances of enjoying your job and feeling well and happy and healthy. So from the individual point of view, there's lots of different strategies. Within our own research, what we wanted to look at was which of the different factors that might help teachers have the biggest impact. And the factors that were identified were things like self-esteem. So when we work with teachers and with our student teachers, we talk to them about the kind of threats that you have in schools to self-esteem. You do have to be quite sturdy in a sense to work in a school, because you do get negative feedback sometimes from kind of built into the system almost through inspection frameworks, some of the leadership practices that are happening in school. Sometimes children are giving you unwelcome and quite tricky feedback, parents, and sometimes you can't get rid of the threats because they're just a part of the job. But I always say to teachers, a big part of managing these things is to be aware of them, so that if you're feeling a bit rubbish, you know why you're feeling a bit rubbish and that tomorrow you'll feel different. And then we also talk about positive strategies that you can take to try and boost your self-esteem. It can be very simple things like just taking a step back each day to reflect on 3 things that have gone really well, rather than focusing on the one lesson that didn't go very well. Try and collect all the evidence of what a good job you're doing, because sometimes I think teachers are at risk because they work on their own a lot in their own classrooms. The children in the class won't necessarily think, oh, the teacher needs a boost to her self-esteem today. So you're not necessarily going to get praise from anyone else every day. So it's useful to kind of keep that self-esteem up yourself, and keep a little collection of the lovely letters that you will get from parents when things do go well, the little notes that children write you, and just mentally think about all the things that happen each day, because I think teaching is an incredibly skilled, incredibly complex job, and it's really important that teachers focus on all the stuff that they do right, rather than being encouraged to focus on the things that they could do better. Also things like self-awareness and other aspects of emotional intelligence come out as being really important. So we give teachers and student teachers practical strategies to be more aware of their own emotions and their behaviour as well. So we give them nice little tools that we've pinched from cognitive behavioural therapy that you can just kind of do in your head if you're starting to feel a negative emotion. So maybe you're feeling quite stressed because a child is exhibiting challenging behaviour in your classroom. When you get that kind of physical feeling rising, you can take a step back, reflect on it, label the feeling, think about what thought is driving that feeling, and then think about how you might reframe your thinking to de-escalate the feeling and calm down and see the situation differently.
So how do you think that COVID-19 has impacted on teachers' resilience, and what are some of the changes teachers have made due to COVID-19?
So I think COVID-19 has affected people, not just teachers, in really complex ways, and sometimes it's quite hard to really put your finger on how it's affected you, but some of the things that have stood out to me from kind of recent conversations that I've had with teachers and students working in schools is that I think they're more isolated than they have been. And again, I think this does vary quite a lot depending on which school you, but I know some teachers have been encouraged to eat their lunch in their own classroom. They're all being encouraged to sort of, well, not all, but most of them encouraged to stay in bubbles and so on. So their social contact has been limited a lot within school. And that can have a really big impact because our research shows that support from colleagues is really, really important. That was one of the biggest factors. But also in lots of other research out there with teachers and also with children shows that relationships are absolutely central. So, I always say to my students and also to the teachers that I work with, if you only remember one sentence from my resilience lecture or workshop, it's that, relationships are at the heart of resilience. And if there's one thing you should invest in, it's that. And it's really hard to invest in relationships during a pandemic because, as I say, you're isolated within school, but also then you come home and your social networks have become a lot narrower or constrained in various ways. And I think also one of the issues is that teachers are maybe not feeling quite as valued as some of the other heroes, if you like, in the pandemic. There's been a lot of focus on the NHS, which obviously is great, and nobody wants to take away from that. But I've heard a lot of teachers on social media and so on pointing out that they've been on the front line as well from the beginning. Right from the beginning of the pandemic, they're still there, and they've got very limited PPE. And I know a lot of teachers have been concerned about them then going home, having been in contact with a lot of different people during the day, to family members who are perhaps vulnerable for various reasons. So that's a big stressor. And we've not even talked about anything to do with education yet, because that's just the social side. But from an educational point of view, the teachers have got a huge job because they're trying to catch up on several months of missed learning. I know people in the news have been talking a lot about the north-south divide, and how we've always had historically a north-south divide in terms of equality when it comes to education. So if you look at statistics of GCSE results and so on, the north overall tends to not do as well as the south, and that raises lots of issues in terms of structural inequality and, well, why is that? But I think this pandemic unfortunately is going to amplify that. So I think that's adding a whole layer of stress really for teachers, that they've got this big task of how to make up for all the disruption. And I think secondary schools have been even worse badly hit than primaries in terms of that disruption, in terms of school closures, class closures and so on. So a lot of people were quite concerned about the implications for transition, particularly for year 6 children going from one phase to another. And I know a lot of parents were quite worried about the fact they felt the children were missing out on these sort of rites of passage, like end of school assemblies, school trips and so on. And I know a lot of schools work really hard to try and fill that gap and try and do things in a COVID secure way, but obviously some things were just not possible. And there were quite a lot of children being interviewed on the news and so on, saying how they felt they'd missed out, they couldn't say goodbye. So there were concerns over that kind of social, emotional side of things.
Some of your work also looks at how principles of economics can be applied within teaching. Please can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the reason I became interested in that was because you often hear in schools, but also in universities, this term work smart. And so I thought I'd do a bit of digging to see, well, is there anything written about this? Like, has anyone theorized around the idea of working smarter, which everyone seems to tell you to do, but nobody really knows what it is? And then I came across this book written by a guy who's a professor in business and economics. And I found it really interesting. It's called Great at Work, and he talks about principles for working smart. So he has actually come up with a theoretical framework. So I'm in the middle of writing a paper at the moment. I've delivered a conference presentation on it already, about, is it possible, or is it useful, is it helpful to apply those principles from economics and kind of management to teachers? Would it actually help them or not? The thing that stood out to me the most from that reading was that the author talks about P squared, passion times purpose. So he says that the people that are the most effective in their jobs, the most productive, have passion and purpose. And what struck me is that teachers must be off the scale generally for both of those. But what I found is that that actually puts you at risk. So it makes you better at your job, but from a well-being point of view, it puts you at risk. And that's something I've long kind of thought about myself. And I remember my dad saying to me when I was, a very busy, overworked teacher, your problem is you care too much, and I think you could argue a lot of teachers care too much. But what was interesting is in this economics book, which is, not looking at teachers specifically at all, they found that these very effective workers had lower levels of well-being. So it's kind of that dilemma between, do you want to be an excellent teacher or do you want to be a happy teacher, and can you be both? And so to me, that's in a teacher context, the essence of working smart is trying to resolve that dilemma.
So what has been the proudest moment of your research career?
I think the thing that I feel most proud of so far with my research is actually the work that I've done around teacher well-being, because what I found really nice is doing the interactive workshops with teachers and student teachers where I do some delivery in terms of what we found in the research, but then it becomes much more about us kind of constructing meaning together. And then the bit where I felt proudest is afterwards, when they've said that process of making sense alongside the research findings has actually really helped them in some concrete way in terms of their careers or their well-being. So I have had teachers say that it's kind of stopped them from wanting to leave the profession because they now feel they've got strategies. I've had students say that they now feel much less worried about going on placement because they've got a better understanding of the risks they face, and they've got strategies they can go in for. And I think, to me, that's what it's all about. From a selfish point of view, I love researching things because I find it really interesting, but actually what it's really about is doing research that makes a difference. So even though you know, I'm not necessarily changing the world. It's really nice when you've changed a little bit of somebody's individual world, you know, however small that is. So yeah, those are the bits that I've found really exciting, really, and make it all worthwhile.
And you're actually an alumnus from the Faculty of Education at Manchester Met. How was your experience as a student here?
I absolutely loved being a student at Manchester Met. I was so excited about becoming a teacher, and it was a PGCE, so that, you know, they're only about 9 months long or something. So it's a real baptism of fire into the world of teaching. But yeah, I was so excited, and I just wanted to learn every single thing I could, because I knew that, you know, I wanted to be the best teacher that I could be. And the tutors were fantastic.
What courses do you teach on at Manchester Met?
So I teach on the BA in primary education, and so I teach lots of Englishy bits because of my knowledge around language development. But I also teach some of the more general stuff around kind of professional studies, professionalism, and I do lots of extra teacher wellbeing stuff because I feel passionate about that, and so I do that to try and prepare students for placement. I also teach on the PGCE in primary education, so I teach similar things on that programme, and I teach on the doctorate in education, which I really enjoy, and I'm involved in developing the new updated version of that, which starts in September, so that's exciting. So I really love working with doctoral students because they're so excited and passionate about their own research interests, and they come with really different ideas. So that's really exciting, and I have quite a lot of students that I supervise, either as a principal supervisor or first supervisor as well.
So what would be your top tip to any students thinking of studying an undergraduate or a postgraduate degree in teaching at Manchester Met?
I think my first tip would be to make sure it's what you want to do, because teaching is a fantastic job. It is so rewarding, but you have to want to do it, and you have to be doing it for intrinsic reasons. And what I mean by that is you need to want to do it because you like the idea of teaching and you like the idea of changing children's lives, rather than because, you know, it's got job security or you weren't sure what else to do and so on. So I think it's important to sort of make sure it is what you want to do first, because it's, you know, it is challenging, it does take a lot of hard work, so you've got to have that investment in it. And it's really important to try and get into schools as much as you can before you apply, to help you to make that decision. But also, even if you know, and you've always known it's what you've wanted to do since you were little, it's really important to get into schools, you know, just to volunteer for odd days, or, you know, whatever you can manage, just to give you that experience, which will help you in your interview, but it will also just give you some stuff to draw upon in those first few sessions before you've had any school experience. And then once people get on the programme, my next tip is just be organised and read loads of stuff, you know, because actually what I don't think people always realise is that being a really good teacher, part of that is being a researcher, whether you do formal research or not, and it's about engaging with new ideas, new ways of thinking. So we do try and get our students feeling excited about research and about knowledge, even if, you know, even at that kind of undergraduate level.
What do you think are the benefits of studying a postgraduate degree at Manchester Met?
So I think doing a postgraduate degree is always, for me personally anyway, I've done quite a few postgraduate degrees because I loved it so much. It gives you a real chance to think critically and think deeply about things, and really gives you that space to reflect. So I often say to our student teachers, as they're sort of coming to the end of their PGCE or their undergrad course, you know, I know you might not feel like it now, but hopefully some of you'll be back in, you know, a year or two, because, you know, believe it or not, you'll miss these spaces to really reflect and think about things. Because teaching is great and it's lots and lots of fun, but it's quite hard when you're in the thick of it sometimes to have that space to really think and read and so on. So it gives you that opportunity. And at Manchester Met, we've got a really strong offer. We've kind of got something for everyone, really. So we've got, you know, master's programs around lots of different areas relevant to education. We've got the new Teach program, which is very specifically oriented at you know, practice. So it's about engaging with research and critical thinking, but it's got a very strong, you know, grounded in practice. So it's kind of not extra work, it's about seeing the work that you are already doing in school as a teacher in a different way, and kind of enriching that and strengthening that. And then of course we've got, you know, the doctoral programs where you get to really dig deep. And I know I remember it really stood out to me, one teacher who did the EdD program said that it had completely changed her life. Like, it just made her see the whole world in a completely different way. And I think that's what postgrad studies designed to do in a way. It's not just about learning how to do something, it's about completely thinking about things in new ways.
So to like summarize it, it's you've got the skills now and it's reflecting on those skills and like sharpening them and refining and making them better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about you know, I tend to think of it in terms of, if you're doing a PGCE, for example, in those 9 months, you're covering the kind of basics of how to teach, how to plan, how to assess, how to meet the professional standards, which is a big job in itself. But then if you take it a step further and you study to do a master's, it gives you that space to really deepen and refine your thinking and to engage much more with different ideas that are out there, rather than just one particular approach maybe that you've developed and become competent at, and just to really strengthen that kind of theory practice integration.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for speaking to us today, Steph. It's been very interesting, and yeah, I think we could do this again soon at some point.
Thank you. Bye.